Hello, everyone.
Welcome to another episode of What About This Idea? We are in our new studio, and we've added 2 plants.
Plants. How swanky.
You guys,
Woo.
I know, it's impressive.
The plants are on loan, though. I mean, you've added the plants, but you told me that they're borrowed.
No, these are actually our plants.
Oh, they're yours.
The chair is borrowed.
The chair is borrowed. We do have a lot of borrowed things in here.
We are working on sets, like actual sets in this room for different shows.
I love it.
So this will be our comfy corner set.
Yeah.
Sit, cash. Then we'll have our formal table set.
Got to wear a tie for that?
Well, it's just sort of like a working session. If you're like doing some AI chats or you got your Zooms going on or all that, you got other people coming in, that'd be a good spot for that, right?
I like it.
And then we'll have a TV for that. We have a TV for that. And then maybe a little couch corner.
We can record out on the patio, too.
And we can record on the patio.
Oh,
people.
And these mics will handle it really well.
Yeah.
Love it. So,
Yeah.
Yep. So anyway, what about this idea? We, when we started, Eric Brooker, by the way.
Yep.
We should introduce.
Eric Brooker.
Let's just get that part out though, because I hate doing the stuff before the show starts. And you were saying that somewhere right outside of Cleveland, was it?
Just outside of Pittsburgh, west of Pittsburgh, about 45 minutes, is Steubenville, Ohio.
And that's
Well, as my parents grew up in Cleveland.
Yeah.
So when I told them our son was considering Franciscan University of Steubenville, they said, the country's smelliest town.
Okay.
I don't know that I noticed it.
Well, if you didn't notice it, it certainly can't be.
We've been there now 3 or 4 times.
Okay.
It didn't smell bad.
What
didn't smell great.
What was the reasoning behind thinking it would be the smelliest town?
So just outside of Pittsburgh, so think the Steelers, Steel City, a lot of manufacturing, a lot of blue-collar, outdoor construction, steel, mills, different things like that.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Air quality probably bad. Do you remember how South St. Paul used to smell?
It still does.
It was intense back in the day.
You go right over the 494
Yeah.
bridge, over the Mississippi, and every time I've lived out there 5 years now, and every time I look at my wife and I'm like,
what smells over there?
Because
I've got
Stockyards.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
I was gonna say I've got 2 entries.
Yeah.
And one entry is.
You have an entry for the stinkiest place?
Yeah.
Is that
and I'd like for people to write in.
Yeah, give us your entries.
Call.
For some reason, on What About This Idea,
Don't call
we're
me.
taking entries,
Yeah.
suggestions of the stinkiest place
So what are they?
you've ever been.
Greeley, Colorado has the country's largest pig farms.
Yeah.
It is.
Is it in Colorado? Really?
Yeah, it's on the
Because I
Front
thought it was
Range.
like out on the East Coast or something.
Greeley?
No, the stinkiest place, pig farms.
Somewhere outside of Las Vegas, there's another giant pig farm lot, where they're processing, killing.
I'm going to say you win. North Platte, Nebraska, if you've ever driven through the western side of Nebraska, it's about a half an hour on either side of one of the largest cow farms in the country. And that's
pretty bad.
It's pretty bad.
So Greeley is on the western slope or eastern slope or whatever, right? So it's out kind of in the country, and the prevailing winds take it out somewhere where there's no one. But every now and again, the winds come back the other way, and they hit Fort Collins, and you're like, oh God, Greeley. When I lived out there,
Oh God,
all
Greeley.
day long. And then the other stinkiest town, and it's changed a lot since I was a kid, but International Falls, the Blanding
I've never
paper
been
mill.
up there.
Oh my God, paper pulp when you're processing it, and there's just this giant factory in the middle of town spewing out this stuff. Stinkiest, and it's its own unique smell. So
all right, well, that's your show for the day.
Yep.
That's the show.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for joining us.
We hope you learned a ton about entrepreneurship.
It's a ton. It's a ton. Well, tell us a little bit about what's your 5-second intro?
My 5-second. Well, I like to win people over with podcast host and best-selling author.
I love that.
Because that tends to be the thing that pulls people in.
That draws
Right.
them in.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then are they like, so you have a huge audience on your show? And you're like, yes.
You know what's interesting?
Of course.
And I don't know that you guys chase these numbers. Somebody asked me, the book's been out almost exactly a year.
Okay.
And I am asked with some regularity, how many copies have you sold?
Yeah.
I have no idea.
More than zero.
Yeah, I know that at one point I had a bestseller emblem for a couple weeks on Amazon, so that felt great.
Yeah.
I have no idea. I have no idea where I rank on the world of podcasts. I had someone a couple years ago, a good buddy of mine, Ryan, say, hey, do you know you sit in the top 1% of all podcasts?
Right.
I said, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
But I had no idea.
What's
well-
the name of your podcast?
Counsel Culture.
Counsel Culture. I love
As
that.
in cancel. God,
Get
There
it?
you go.
Do you get it?
yeah, I got it.
Did you
I picked
see
up
that- see
right
what he
away.
did there?
He's obviously had his coffee this morning.
clever.
Yes. I took my lion's mane this morning, so I am
I
on
don't
it.
drink coffee.
No?
No, I know. I used to, and then it started to react weird.
Oh, well.
Who knows?
He's
Who knows?
chemically sensitive.
I guess so.
That's the other podcast, though.
Chemically sensitive. We should start one.
We did have a chemically sensitive. That's a great podcast.
I like it. What does it
Just go
mean?
through all the chemicals,
Yeah,
see
it's
how
like-
they
like,
see
why
how you
can't I-
react.
Smell some Simple Green.
Everyone's into this THC. Every time I drink one of those, I'm like, oh, I feel a little weird. So I must be chemically sensitive
There you go.
Exactly.
to it. You know, coffee makes me weird. Chemically sensitive. We could just list the things that people
Exactly.
are sensitive to. I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, no, I have a
sensitive to
ton of
angry
questions.
people.
Since I don't do any research, I really literally do zero research, and I love it that
And
way.
he said, who's this guy that's coming in? I'm like, he is awesome. I can hardly wait to hear
Yeah.
his story. And
What time does he
he's
show
like, don't
up?
tell me. He goes, don't tell me anything. I'm like, well, okay, now I can't even be excited.
There you go.
Okay, so let's start with the book stuff. Okay, so you've written a book, you put it out there. You've got X number of copies that have sold. You end up with a little emblem on it.
Yep.
But you know, for me, when I think of it, the people that are asking you, how many copies have you sold? Do you feel a little challenged by that when they ask you that? Like it's a
I actually,
like they're trying to get you.
I think I feel oddly empowered that I don't know enough or care enough to look.
Well, that's
Because
good.
it was, for me, writing the book was a commitment I had made to myself. I pushed that out to the world so people would hold me accountable to writing a book.
Yeah.
But then it was a matter of getting the book into the hands of the people that I think need to read it. And if the book impacts one person or 1 million people, it made a difference the way it was supposed to.
Because the absence of that book, it didn't affect that person.
Correct.
Or that million people.
So I know
Whatever it
I've
is.
sold, I know my mom bought one.
Mom's got it.
I sent Dad a
Did
free
your mom
copy.
read it?
You know, it was surprising. So I
send Dad one.
I talk a lot about my childhood and kind of growing up and my young adulthood. And my wife read it. I was out of town one weekend and she called me and said, hey, I just finished your book. Can I ask you a question? And I said, you read the book? She's like, well, Eric, I had already read most of it as you were writing it. But
Right.
yeah, I sat down over the weekend and I read the book. So
That's very
Let's
sweet.
talk about book. I love this because we've had several people on that have written books, right?
We have a lot of people who are going to write a book in the future, perhaps,
Exactly.
too, right?
Like I'm looking to write a book, right? Let's talk about writing a book. Like, what was your inspiration to write a book, and what has it done for you as an entrepreneur to have a best-selling book on Amazon? What's the name of your book?
You Are Enough. The subtitle is Overcoming Lifelong Doubts of Worthiness.
Oh, God, we could go in for hours.
Hours and hours.
That would be a whole different show.
You know what's interesting is I felt as I'm a couple years into the podcast and I felt like I wanted to get out and do more speaking, but I didn't have anything tangible. I didn't have a product. And I had really just started reading. I spent 40 some odd years not reading much.
Yeah, I understand that.
And then I
go
would
through spurts.
But then I would go on I'd have someone on my show. Ryan Leake is a great example. Ryan wrote a book, Leveling Up is his most recent, but he wrote a book prior to that called Chasing Failure. I'm sitting in Target, I'm in the book aisle, and I thought, this book looks really great. So I scooped it up, I read it, and I reached out to Ryan on LinkedIn, and he came on the show. And I thought, well, if I do the homework, they'll come on the show.
Yeah.
So I started reading, and I hadn't found a book like this. I'd had not a guest like this on my show, and I thought, nobody's experienced this the way I've experienced it, so I'm going to write the book. And what I've learned in writing the book and getting it out to the world is so many people have experienced this, and nobody talks about it.
And the this that you're referring to is?
There's a number of stories from the estranged relationship my wife and I have with our soon-to-be 24-year-old daughter, to the loss of my sister-in-law, to alcohol addiction 4 years ago this month, to suicide. And there's stories of many other people in there that share their stories and their vulnerability. But the reality of it is, and I talk about this in my keynote, in one of my keynotes, we're all going through something.
Everyone. Always.
We just need permission to talk about it.
Yeah.
We had a miscarriage about a year ago, and I was fairly certain nobody had ever had a miscarriage because nobody talks about it.
Nobody does talk about it.
1 in 4 pregnancies end up in miscarriage.
But that's the statistic.
Certainly no one's had it.
But why are we not talking about these things? So as I've opened up, I've become vulnerable, not really knowing I was vulnerable. What I realized was I was not alone. I was enough just as I was. But then so's the barista at Starbucks that screwed up my order. They're going through something. They have been diagnosed. Maybe their mom was diagnosed with something. They still had to come in to get the hours, to pay the bills, to do the thing. We're all going through something.
The word vulnerability, right? I understand its meaning in this context, and I think it's a good one, but there's something problematic about that word for me when it comes to like the context of what you were just saying. You needed to have conversations and be open, and I understand that requires some vulnerability.
Yeah.
But it really could, like the word vulnerable, if you say you need to make yourself vulnerable, I think is a more frightening thing to say to people than you need to make yourself just open. You know what I mean? There's something about the connotation with the word vulnerable.
I think we have to talk about the context of what we're looking for. You asked what it has done for me in the entrepreneurship. I've gotten more keynotes post-book than ever before, and it opens the conversation about openness or vulnerability in the workplace. I get real and raw on stage. I talk about all of the things. And then
if you don't do that, you don't get that.
Yeah,
you don't get up there, right?
But then I talk about the fact that you're not likely going to all embrace this idea of vulnerability and just start oozing to your team on a Monday morning, but you need them to be open, which means you have to build relationship capital, which means I need to tell you that we just bought a home or that we're just putting our house on the market. Like I need to share more personal stuff so you can feel open to sharing more personal stuff.
I mean, it's empathy.
Yeah, but then all of a sudden when I realize that you're closing on a house next week, I can pull you in the office on a Monday saying, hey, I know you've got a lot going on this week.
Yeah.
I'll take care of the TPS report. Why don't you take Friday off? Or whatever it is. October 27th is the 4-year anniversary of losing my sister-in-law. That's a tough day.
Yeah.
I would love for my boss to call that out a week before, like, hey, I know the 27th is a tough day. Why don't you go take your wife to lunch and not come back to the office until Monday?
What does that do for a workplace? You know, I mean, how much better of a workplace is it when you know each other and you care enough about each other to say, I know this is a bad time right now.
Gallup did a bunch of studies. I'm reading a book right now called Employality, and it's oddly self-serving. Doing the right thing is oddly self-serving.
Yeah.
Revenues go up, employees stay longer, people work harder, people are more invested in the business. The return on investment in being vulnerable or being open, more importantly, the return on investment in building relationship capital with the people that you work with is 5 to 6x.
Yeah, and we don't see it that way. And also, it's a lot easier to be authentic.
It's better for everyone.
100%.
Transparent. But let me ask you, so going back to how this has really, you've used it in your career, is the book very direct correlation to what your keynotes are about?
Yes.
Okay.
So the keynotes were different before. The conversation, the talk track was a little bit different. And then I wrote a book that's mostly personal. And then one of the author friends of mine that helped on this journey said, you're going to sell a bunch of books. Now, people are going to buy them for your keynote. You'll do the book signing. And I thought, I don't even know how to turn that book into a keynote in the business world. And sure enough, weeks after the book came out, I got a phone call. Hey, can you be in Chicago on this date? I said, yeah.
What are we if you're paying me and you fly me down there?
Well, and they
I'm pretty
did.
sure it's kind of up to you, actually.
They said, we want you to talk about your book and the impact of relationship capital and all this stuff. And I thought, I've not done that before. But you're going to write me a check. I probably need to have a keynote about the book, so let's do it.
Yeah.
And then that grew. Okay, so you have other businesses.
I do.
And so how has that had any effect on these other businesses other than intrinsically now you're operating maybe differently in them? Or is it really kind of separated where your attention is?
So 8 years ago, great question. 8 years ago, my friend Patrick and Patrick lives in Salt Lake. He happened to be in town. We went to dinner and he started talking. I was an employee at the time. He started talking to me about LinkedIn and social media and the impact that social can have, period. And I thought, well, that's the single dumbest thing I've ever heard. But we talked about it during the entire meal. So I thought, Patrick, in an effort to prove you wrong, I'm going to go all in on this LinkedIn thing.
Oh, you did I wish I had invested in all of the things that I thought were a really dumb idea over the years.
Uber, who's going to want to get in a car with a stranger?
This is so dumb.
But I started posting on LinkedIn. I started doing all the things. And sure enough, I went to a trade show 6 months later and everyone knew who I was. And it was like, wait a minute, I know you from LinkedIn, right? And what I realized is I don't have to create different versions of myself. I'm authentically me. You don't have to like me. I don't have to like you. This is who I am. Mm-hmm. And I would say the primary other business, which is a marketplace or platform in the technology world, specifically consulting around sales and marketing and industry best practices for software as a service companies, many of those conversations start with, hey, how's the book going? Hey, did I see you're doing a talk for Amazon in November? So it brings credibility to me as an individual, which I think brings credibility to the conversation that we're having, regardless of what it is.
Yeah.
This is the same thing we talk about with the whole podcast studio.
And we've talked about this before, is that, especially as we move forward, I'm in a tech field, a human and tech field. We have a production studio here. And I feel like the world, we talked a little bit about this before we sat down too. The world is moving so quickly, and finding your category really isn't about looking at someone else similar to your category, but it is finding it from who you are. And it creates that category, right? Even me, so I have AvidEdge, Retained Executive Recruiting for Technology, and Devine Fox, which is a production company for people to find their voice, right?
To put their voice out into the world,
How has that come together? Well, I think it's still forming itself. But we at AvidEdge have been able to grab a lot of intelligence from things that we have learned And I have said and brought it into AvidEdge. And it really is about finding your voice. It's about connecting candidates to find their voice. It's having clients finding their voice. And so slowly it sort of churns and morphs into this amazing category that nobody else really went toward.
So we built out, my business partner and I on the technology side are in the processes of building out, think of it like a masterclass program for software as a service companies. And as we were building it out, laying the business plan out, I thought, well, wait a minute. We're going to build a video series all about industry best practices. Well, my podcast is about leadership and culture. Cameron, we should have some of my past guests in an unrelated business in the masterclass talking about leadership and culture and trust and vulnerability and all of the things that I've interviewed. So the correlation is very similar, but it's important that you find your voice. The commercial when I was a kid, we all wanted to be like Michael Jordan, right? I want to be like Mike. What I realized, it probably sold a lot of whatever, shoes or Pepsi or whatever his shtick was back then. But the reality of it is nobody's a better Michael Jordan than Michael Jordan, which means
he was pretty good at it.
He's not done a bad job of being. But at my best, I'm the second best Michael Jordan.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, that would be interesting to follow you around and
5'7".
see you do. I mean,
on a good day. But finding my voice means that I'm the best version of myself, which allows me to go to market as an author or podcast host or the CEO of a SaaS company.
Right.
I think people who have, most of the clients that have come to us to talk about, this is an interesting topic for me, but the clients that have come and started shows have almost universally said, I've been thinking about doing this for 2 or 3 years or longer. And then they're nervous when they start. And then 6 months or a year in, they're like, something about this has changed everything for me.
100%.
You know, and I think that a lot of entrepreneurs, when we start a business, we've had to jump into some water that no one else is jumping into. Like we took the leap, right? And then we're in the water and we're looking out at the world and we're like, don't you see me? I took the jump and I'm in the water, and everyone's like too busy. They're just walking along the cliff up there doing their work. They don't know. So it's through, whether it's through social channels, which seems so self-serving, and you don't want to burden your friends with all your BS by constantly being on these things, right? But if you don't do that, no one notices you. And if you're only doing it to get noticed, that's inauthentic, and people don't like that. So you have to mix the two.
So I failed in my first business about 15 years ago as an entrepreneur. And I failed, as my buddy Keith told me, you just waited for the phone to ring. Yeah. I sat there and thought, I've had a successful career in technology. I'm going to
find me.
They're going to find me. They're going to pick up the phone. And you know what? Nobody picked up the phone.
They didn't even know how to.
No.
They don't know you're there to do it.
Bingo. And social media is, first of all, it's free. It's a great platform. I rarely, if ever, talk about the stuff that I sell or the service offering. What I do is I'm just authentically myself. And the people that like me, people buy from people they like and trust. Yeah. The people that like me will find me.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't have to be more complicated than that.
Correct.
You know, if I think the stuff that I am not drawn to is when it's very contrived, and you know that these people are working so hard to put on this persona of this thing, and you're like, ick, you know. But I'm not bothered by seeing authentic people doing their thing over and over in these spaces. Not at all. So,
and you know, the people that aren't going to be supportive, they'll unfriend you on social.
Yeah, if they don't like it, they can.
And that's okay.
That's totally okay.
Yeah, there's a difference between, I always say it like this, and I'm personally going through this right now with AvidEdge specifically, And that in the recruiting and staffing and executive search world, there's a lot of choices,
Yeah.
right? And most of them that are drivers of business are how I describe like the barking dogs. They're always nipping at your heel, constant nipping at your heel, and you're kicking them off all the time. Get
Yeah.
off
That's my
heel, get off
5-year-old,
my-
by the way.
Yeah, right.
Not my dog, my 5-year-old.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
until finally someone has a need for whatever it is they've been nipping about, and they're like, fine, just let's have
Yeah.
a conversation. And here I am, like the good attentive puppy, waiting to be bought,
Quietly,
right?
not
Like
barking.
here I am. I'm not barking. So how? This is the balance I want to create, because I don't want to be that nippy puppy. I don't want to be nipping at your heels all the time. But I want you to know I'm here when you need me, right? So what is it you hear that continues to keep me fresh, top of mind, right?
I think the important thing from a communication standpoint, so we're not nipping,
Yeah.
is I don't call people and say, "Hey, it's Eric. I'm just following up." I don't text people. My business partner, Cameron, who you've met, is gotten me to embrace this idea of voice first communication. I rarely send texts. I try not to send emails when the alternative is, why don't I just pick up the phone?
Yeah.
And I've got a buddy, Tim, in Dallas, who I think the absolute world of. There's probably a reason that we have not done a lick of business in the 10 or 15 years that I've known him. He's a really great guy. Mm-hmm. We could probably make a lot of money together, but the timing hasn't been right. And
Right.
I've built a heck of a relationship with him. And if the time comes, great. But in the meantime, I've got a new friend. He and his family drove through, the Dakotas during COVID and stopped at our house for a couple of days. Met my wife, met the kids, we hung out, we did the park thing, we had a great time, because my agenda is not to sell you anything. My
Right.
agenda is to call you with purpose. Mm-hmm. And that purpose might be, hey, listen, I saw on LinkedIn that you guys just got back from a big family trip. How was it? Mm-hmm. That might be the only reason I call.
And that is so much more authentic, right?
But that's all I really care about. I
That's
want
all
to hear
really
about the
care
trip.
about, right? Yeah, exactly. And it's the truth, right?
Yeah.
And I think that I always hesitated, like, they don't care. They don't want me to care about their personal life. And then I'm thinking, why wouldn't they? I would want you to care about my personal life.
But you realize that you've done something right when sales guy, entrepreneur gets a phone call from a potential client. Hey, I know you've wanted to take your wife to a Packers game. I've got 2 extra tickets this week. If you want to swing by the office, you can pick them up.
Yeah.
Well, Skip,
Well,
how much
that's a
do
nice call.
Skip, how much do I owe you? Man, go to Lambeau, have fun, just pick up the tickets.
Yeah.
But it's because there's an authentic relationship being built.
Right. Exactly.
Well, LinkedIn. So it's socials. The socials are funny because they are free and they can be great, but they also can feel hyper transactional. Because I'm on LinkedIn getting bombarded constantly with, hey, I see you do this. I think you're great. Can I sell you this thing that I've got? Like, I don't want that. I don't want that. Constantly. Email too. How many cold emails do we get? Yet when you talk about marketing, people are like, oh, send out emails. We haven't changed much of that. And I think writing a book, having a show, continuing with things, just being out there authentically is just far better marketing in total.
The podcast and the book, for that matter, are really funny to me because I have an idea who listens to the podcast. And if the amount of people that said, how's the podcast? I see you're still podcasting. Great show. How's it going? Mm-hmm. I'd be in the Joe Rogan category because it's hundreds and thousands of people in my passing.
How long is your show?
How long's it been
How
around?
long is each show?
Oh, about 35 minutes.
Okay, that's manageable.
Yeah. But the reality of it is because of social, they know about the show.
Yeah.
And that's a talking point, and it brings credibility. It wasn't intended, but what has happened is it just brings credibility
all
to
it is.
all the other things that you do.
Yeah, it's this is. I mean, you're preaching to the choir here, as they say, or whatever. It's what I keep telling people. I don't know. I've had a hard time defining exactly why I think it's so important, but I know it's about getting your voice out and just learning to speak with people and authentically and stuff.
I'm not a fan of people calling themselves servant leaders. I'm also not a fan of people calling themselves thought leaders. I apologize if that's your thing.
Not mine.
But
please don't look to me as a thought leader.
What I have seen,
you and I both look like
what I have seen with the podcast and the book, and for Cameron, what I have seen with just his efforts on social media, my business partner.
How do you like influencer?
I wouldn't call myself any of those.
Well, that's like the new hot name.
Yeah, I would.
God, it's like
but I think those are bestowed upon you by others.
Yeah.
And I think what I've found through social platforms, because listen, as a entrepreneur, you don't have an unlimited budget. I don't have tens of thousands of dollars a month to throw at pay-per-click, SEO, and all these things.
No, and that's what everyone says
You need
to do. And I like, maybe that was true when it was kind of fresh, but now it's like seems like a waste of money to me.
But if I can get there to the same end for free and have people think of me as a thought leader because I'm pushing out thoughtful content around topics that are important to me. I mean, I sat on a podcast, the guy Andy Andrews out of Alabama, super great guy, wrote the cover quote for my book, very generous. He had me on his podcast when I was in his studio, and he introduced me as a thought leader on topics around leadership and culture.
Okay.
We finished the podcast, and I said, hey, you may want to edit the thing at the beginning because I wouldn't put myself. And he goes, Eric, how many podcasts have you done? How many people have you talked to? How many books have you read on the topic? At some point.
And that's his perception of you.
But you got to push your knowledge out to the world so other people can have that perception.
Yeah, where'd you grow up?
Me, Phoenix.
Okay. So you don't suffer from the
Midwest.
upper Midwestern, don't say nice things about me thing that.
No.
Yeah,
nope,
okay, you can handle it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like upper Midwesterners definitely, it's not
Like,
everyone.
I like your outfit. Hey, I got it on sale.
Yeah.
But
You're looking great. Well, I've looked better.
of course I do. No,
Don't say nice crap about me. That's what but no, that's good. So you can handle that.
I think it wasn't something I used to enjoy. It wasn't. I'd get really awkward, probably like most Midwesterners.
Yeah.
What I've learned is to take that in and embrace that. So I'm very grateful when people say those things.
I mean, if you say to me that I'm a thought leader, I have a certain perception of what that means when you say that to me.
Yeah.
But if someone else has you on their show and says, I've got a thought leader on my show, I'm like, I take that as a compliment paid to you for the work you've done.
Yeah.
So.
Because we talk a lot about entrepreneurs. I don't know how far we're in because you don't have your timer anymore.
I can tell you.
But we might want to save it for the second half.
We're second half material here.
We're second half material because some of the things that come together with you is this authenticity, this authentic relationships to drive sales and all of that, right? And then there's this business side of you, right? When entrepreneurs are sitting and listening to our show, we've heard oftentimes they're learning from these stories, right? Oftentimes an entrepreneur will become an entrepreneur a couple of different reasons, or probably 1,000 different reasons. But one is they're really good at something and they're like, I can make a business out of this, number one. Two, they're like, dude, we can make money at this. Let's get an investor. And they're more interested in the business side than the content side. And it feels like it kind of comes from one or two of those ways, right? But for either side of that, and I'm more interested in the ones that started a business because they're
good at
something in their heart has said, I think I can make a business out of this great thing I'm doing, right? But then they get into the business and they remember what sales looked like to them that they didn't like, and then they're afraid of everything. Or they don't know how to run their financials, or they don't know some of those things. So some of those things, I feel like you could help in the conversation about the work that you've done, help entrepreneurs think about those things in a different way.
So I'm reading this book, Employality, and the guy starts the book talking about an entrepreneur that started a company called Oklahoma LED. And he admits, going in as he's telling the story, that as the founder of this company, he had no background in lighting. He knew nothing about lighting.
Okay. Yeah, and sometimes that works.
For me,
You know how to do business?
I have never been pushy. I've been authentically myself, and if that jives with a need that you have, let's do some business together. But I'm not pushy, which I think is really important. As an entrepreneur, oftentimes I've got 7 kids. My wife stays at home. We've got 1 in college. I'm a grandfather. Like, all of those things get me up and get me motivated every day. I have to be successful.
I was going to say, the fact is, I'm not here to make relationships,
But
I'm here to make some money, right? I need something to come back in so I can support my family. So it's like people, I think when we say you need to make authentic relationships in order to do business development, I think people are like, I'm not here to make relationships. I'm here because I need something back for this. I've got a family to support. So let's do it in the second half. What do you think?
Should we get
Deal.
into that?
I'll give you
we
3 seconds to think about it.
take a quick little break.
Yeah, let's do it.
I mean, this is, thank you, audience, for being with us. I wonder, like, if anyone turned this into a drinking game, like if the word entrepreneur
hold on.
or
Is it over there?
authentic.
Let's get it.
Right,
No, I'm
that's
not.
yours.
I'm not promoting drinking, but I'm just saying, if you went with authentic or entrepreneur, you'd be under the table at this point.
It's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
All right, let's take a break.
Second half.
We'll be back.
You
Second
guys take
half.
a break from drinking. Okay.
All right.